Good morning, Madison Hills. Feeling good? Good. So before we get started, let me go ahead and clear the air with everything. So first of all, I want to say thank you so stinking much. We had a really rough time Saturday night, Sunday, and for the few days following. My son's here. He's doing phenomenally well, and I chalked that up to a lot of prayers and love that were going out. So thank you so much. But thank you for the texts. I went home Sunday morning to get some resources and bring some stuff back to the hospital and everything to get us prepared for staying the night because he was going to be kept over and everything. And opened my phone and the messages, the texts, the missed calls, emails. Thank you so much for being so considerate and thoughtful about my family and I and caring for us and loving us. The visits, the food, thank you so much. When I'm coming back to the hospital, Bobby Lakes is coming out, and I see him, and if you know Bobby, you can't be in the presence of the guy without laughing. And I was having a really rough time. My eyes were puffy and red and filled with tears, and I'm walking up to the sidewalk, and I have these really weird glasses on. They're like a teal color. A lot of people probably say, oh, those are girl glasses. And I'm wearing them just to cover my eyes. So I don't know what Bobby thought when I walked up to him and had those on. But I'm struggling in that moment. And Bobby comes up and he's able to take just a serious moment and spin it a little bit and gave me a much needed boost. And that's what I felt from you all the whole time. So thank you. You know, pastors try to love on you when things are going on, and that you reciprocate that and send us our way. It's phenomenal. And one other thing, super cool thing, and it let me know that you guys really do listen. So a few weeks ago, I dropped just a side joke about how when you say, hey, brother David, nothing ever good follows. So got this letter in the mail, and there's no return address. Just says David Green and the address, and I open it up. It's just a white piece of paper, and it's folded over, and I open it up, and it says, hey, brother Green. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I said, nothing ever good follows. You know, nobody ever says, hey, brother Green, here's $100. So it was, hey, brother Green, here's $100. And there was a $100 bill attached. And it said, so now you can never use that joke again. That's great. That's great. So whoever sent that, thank you. Thank you for loving us the way you did. It's phenomenal, and we're humbled and blessed to be a part of this Madison Hills family. So really, thank you so much. And if you see my boy, show him some love. He's doing great, and I think he's going to be with us. So, yeah. So here we are. All right. So we're continuing. Oh, one other thing. Marty, I had heard that the guy had preached once or twice. So we asked him to step in, and I know what it's like to step in off the cuff like that sometimes. So Marty, thanks for stepping in wherever you are. Thanks for stepping in and taking care of business like that. Phenomenal. So, all right, so we're going to finish up with our series. Yeah, there you go. There you go. We're going to finish up our series with David this morning, and we're going to move from 1 Samuel to 2 Samuel. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you're familiar with these two chapters. But I got familiar with them 15, 16 years ago, and they just caught my attention, and they've rocked my world for a decade and a half. And I read them, and I reread them. And some time ago, life verses became really popular in the church, and people would identify with a verse, they would hang on to it, and it'd be their life verse, and they would write it on paper or put it on a sticker, write it on notebooks or whatever. These two chapters are kind of my life verse. I think for me, for David Green, these are the two most inspiring chapters of the Bible outside of any teachings on the redemptive nature of Jesus. And I think I would argue that they're kind of a precursor to the redemptive reach of God that we read about through the life of Jesus. But these two chapters are phenomenal. And if I had a takeaway that I would hope that each and every one of you embrace and take with you this morning, it's this idea that we're going to eventually get to in these two chapters. It's the idea that you have permission to move forward. You have permission from your God to move forward in your life. And these two chapters just give us a detailed account of what goes on in David's life and how he reaches a point where he's like, there's some stuff I had to sort through, and now I know how to move forward with it, because of it, and through it. It's just beautiful. So the scene is set. David is king, and he became king after Saul, and things go really, really well. Like, David is cut out for this position. Things are going phenomenally well. He's climbed the corporate ladder. He's at the top. Things are going so well that it becomes the time of season where kings, they go out to war. And there's a lot of nuances to what that can mean. So they go out to war. But David decides, and you read this in the first few verses, 2 Samuel chapter 11. The king's going out to war, but David, and the text tells us, David remained home. He stayed back. He didn't go out. And it could be our first sign that, something bad is going to happen here. So David hangs out, and one day he's walking around. He goes out to the roof, which was kind of common. He's up on his roof. He's walking around, and he sees this gal, and she catches his eye. And there's a problem. She's married. But he's really infatuated with what he's looking at. He sees this gal on his roof, and something happens inside of David. So what kind of scroller are you? TikTok's the big one. I'm not picking on TikTok at all, but TikTok is one of the ones that we hear the most about. Several years ago, it's not so much, and they were even trying to decide whether it was going to be successful or not. But TikTok is the one. What kind of scroller are you? Or are you more like a... Which do you do? Show of hands. Who's the one hand and the thumb? You got it? Yeah. Who's the other hand and the flick? Yeah. Okay. I got you. So there's this thing, and there's two or three different words, but one of them is mindless scrolling. Just mindless scrolling, where your phone's there and you're in a certain context. And it could be at your home, away from home, wherever. It could be right now. And you've got your phone, and you just feel that prompt to get your phone out and open up whatever you open. Sometimes it's news, sometimes it's social media, but you open it up, and there you are. And you're just mindlessly scrolling. And the neat thing is, they've studied this, and they suggest that what happens there is that especially, and maybe some of you youngsters pick up on this, people who do this late at night, where you've worked a long day, you've got a lot of responsibilities, you're overloaded with your schedule, and it's a little late in the evening, and you have to get up the next day, but you've got that tug to get out your phone and scroll. They've actually studied this, and apparently what happens in those moments, even though it's not a good decision, you're going to be up a little late, you have to get up early the next morning. Why am I doing this? They've studied and said it's a form of control. Because so many other things could be out of control. Right now, in this moment, I want my phone, and I want to do this, and I'm going to do it, and it's going to take me nowhere productive, but I can control this. And it's become therapeutic for people. And then the second thing they've discovered is that not only that, it helps us escape reality. It helps us to deny, if you will, reality. I can escape what's really going on for the moment and just be here, no worries, get lost in this world. So when you read some commentaries on the life of David, some of these commentators, it's really neat, they attach David walking around on the roof to mindless scrolling. It's the time when kings go off to war, but things are going well, so he just takes a stroll. He's just up on his roof. And what's really neat is when you keep reading the text, here's what happens. So David, in his mindless scrolling, sees this gal, and you know as well as I do, you've got your algorithm, right? So you know what's coming. But every now and then they send in a video thinking, oh, well, maybe we can get them to go this direction. Or maybe the viewer will be interested in this too. So they throw something new in the mix. So David's just looking around, and here's what he does. He sends some people to find out who she is. So he takes it a step farther. Why don't you go over there, find out about this gal? And then some time goes on. Maybe it's an hour later. Have you ever done that? You look at the time. Good gracious. 60 minutes, come on. And then you're back into reality. So some time goes on, and then David, in his mindless scrolling, he sends some people to get her. No longer is it just who she is, but he finds out the details, and then he sends some people to go and bring this gal back. And if you read the story, we're going to put these two verses together because it's really interesting. He goes to find out who it is, and the people come back and they say, oh, isn't that Bathsheba? She's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So David brings her back. They have a one-night fling. She goes back home. Then she sends word back to David, hey, I'm pregnant. And then the very next words, 2 words, right after that phrase, I'm pregnant, the text tells us, so David. And what do you think David does in this moment? So David. Now, before we get into what David did, I want to introduce you to something, and I hope you know this, and if not, I want you to really lean into this, because the older that I get, the more that I search through the scriptures, the more that I understand about God and his son Jesus and what this whole church thing is all about, the more that I get involved in people's lives, the more that I grow as a human and experience my presence here, the more convinced I am of this. And we've been talking through this series that we've got some stuff going on, just like David. Now he's king, and now this gal that's married is pregnant with his baby. So there's some stuff he's going to have to sort through, just like you and I. There's some stuff we have to sort through, and we want to use these moments right here, not just as a waste of time, but right now in this moment, we can start to sort through some stuff. I mean, that's the purpose of being here anyway. That's one of the purposes of the Bible, to help us understand who we are, how some of our decisions and choices and sins and mistakes have taken us away from this beautiful God, and now he's drawing us back to himself. So we can sort this out right now. So some stuff happens, and I'm really convinced that we've got a bad dynamic going on. Sorry, this mic's messing with me this morning. Sometimes some of us, we get so caught up in what we have done that it blinds us to any possibility of moving forward. But I'm so convinced that what we will do is vastly more important than what we have done. But we get hung up on what we have done. So convinced that when you've got some stuff that happens, because stuff happens, right? Stuff happens. And when you're sorting through the stuff, what you will do is vastly more important than what you have done. So David finds himself in a situation where he's king, things are going great, but now this gal's pregnant and she's married. So David, in the next few verses, like the next 10 verses, detail what David does. And notice what he does. So David calls Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, and says, hey, you've been in battle. Why don't you go home and wash your feet? And I think that's euphemistic language for go home. Spend some time with your wife. That way when she shows up pregnant, everybody just assumes that it's your child. So go home. But Uriah's this crazy cool guy, devoted. So he leaves David's presence and he goes and he just sleeps like at the palace gate. He doesn't go home and he just hangs out there with his men because that's the kind of guy he is. David hears about it. So David tells Uriah, hey, stay with me one more day. And Uriah stays with him, and David takes advantage of him, cooks a great meal, has some food come in, and then David makes sure that Uriah gets drunk. Gets the guy wasted, hoping now that he'll follow through with David saying, go home and spend some time with your wife. But again, Uriah goes out and he sleeps there with the rest of his men because that's the kind of guy he is. Now, what has David done? And what will David do? So David realizes what's going on, and he says, okay, here's what we're going to do. And he sends a letter to Joab, who is Uriah's boss, and he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take Uriah and put him on the front lines where the fighting is the fiercest so that he'll be struck down and die. And if you read the text, that's exactly what happens. This is why what we've done is nowhere near as important as what we will do. And David missed that point. He should have taken a time out and sorted through the stuff with Bathsheba, but instead he gets hung up on what he has done, and now look, he makes matters worse. And maybe you can step into the story there. Some stuff happened. You got hung up on what you had done. And you made matters worse because you didn't know you had permission to actually sort through it, to make it right, and to move forward. No one ever gave you that permission. And maybe you grew up in a region, a culture, or a family home where when you make a mistake, well, everybody just compounds. They come and, they press on you. They bring attention to it. They beat you down. They make it worse, and you internalize that. And there's no way you can move forward. Now, you're not allowed, and it's not even on your radar. That's not how we do things. We have to embrace this. Isn't that crazy how human nature works? So, caveat here, and I want you to pick up on this, just a side note. Sometimes God gets a bad rap. And if you're on social media and you follow some of these guys who are always talking about the complicated texts in the Bible, well, we have one here. This is tough. We've got David, who we know is a good guy. And when you grow up in Sunday school at a church, you're talked about the highlights of David's life. And here, this is kind of a low point, a low spot in his life. And the text tells us later on that God was displeased with this dynamic going on in David's life. God wasn't happy at all. So those texts in the Old Testament especially that are really hard to understand, and they seem like they put God in this kind of position where he's this evil, forceful dictator. Well, it's not always true, and we've got to take these stories in context and really understand what's wrapped around them. So God is displeased with this, and he sends Nathan the prophet. And at that time, the prophet was a guy who would come into town, and he would be this voice of God. God would speak to the prophet, and the prophet would speak to the people. So God sends Nathan to David and said, hey, you got to go and you got to call David out. We got to turn this ship around. I want him to be king, but this is not right. So Nathan, go talk to David about this. So Nathan goes and he talks to David, but he doesn't talk to him like, hey, doesn't just call him out. He tells this crazy story about this family that didn't have a lot. They were kind of on the lower economic scale, if you will. And they had this baby lamb that was really important to them. When I read this story, I think about like a dog. You got a dog that becomes part of the family, right? The dog just takes on part of the personality of the family. You love that dog. It's really like one of your children or like one of your siblings. It's part of the stinking family, this dog that you have. Well, they had this lamb, and that's what it was like. It was with them always, and this family loved this lamb, and there was no way that they were going to slaughter anything. It was one of them. And this king who had access to everything in the land had a dignitary drop by, and he wanted to cook a feast for this dignitary. So instead of taking one of the lambs that he has full access to, he sends someone to get this lamb from this family and slaughter it for this meal. Well, David hears Nathan telling this story, and David's incredulous. He can't believe that somebody would actually do that. David can't believe that somebody would actually do that. So he looks at Nathan and he says, find him. Whoever that is, he must die. And it's one of those powerful moments when you read through this story, if you get enthralled with those narratives in the Old Testament, where Nathan steps in, and can't you just see him, like in the movie, poking David in the chest? And he drops this line where he says, you are that man. And I bet David drops to his knees. His world crumbles. And he says this, I've sinned. I've sinned. Now, I don't know about you, and I don't know how familiar you are with this story, and we've just got some slides up on the screen here. But when you open your Bible, and my Bible's laid out, so chapter 11 is here, and it flows, and on the next page, chapter 12 starts, so I can see this whole story with an open Bible up to this point. And it's really interesting to look at that layout, because David has this moment where he's like, I've sinned. Yeah, you have. Big time. And I'm like, what's going on with David's mind here? What's going on with his thinking? Because you have sinned. And way back over here, David, like 30 verses prior, you sinned with Bathsheba. So what happened? Well, what we have done is nowhere near as important as what we will do. So think about that gap where David could have made things right, but he didn't. And then it reaches a moment where all this stuff's happened. I mean, he's let lust lead the way, and he's embraced deception as his number one tactic for turning his life around. And then he has an innocent man killed. Wow. So maybe it's not that drastic for you. But when I stand before you, I know from human experience, I've been human long enough to know that there's 3 categories that we can bounce around at any given time. And I see some of us taking a step forward. And then we don't sort through stuff the right way or at the right time, or we don't take advantage of this moment where I've done something. And now what I will do moving forward is so much more important. I've got to make this right, that we take 3 or 4 steps back. And it sends us in the direct opposite direction. So you start out and then it's back. It's inverted motion. And maybe that's where you are. You've got a little traction going on. But you're not sorting through this because you're hung up on what you've done, not what you will do. So you're really going backward. And then some of us, we've got this idea where it's motion, right? And we're doing some stuff. And it's like you're making this move, but you've realized that over time you found yourself right back where you are, kind of like David. He's got this gal, and now she's pregnant. And then he sets up this crazy hit job on this guy, Uriah. And then it reaches a point where he's like, I've sinned. Yeah, that's where you were not too long ago. And I see this happen so many times, and this is what breaks my heart. There's a young guy that I've been mentoring for some time now. And we talked, and we lost a little base, I don't know, for a couple of years, and we're trying to start something up now. We just went in different directions. And I remember being on the phone with him when we were talking, and I said, listen, I want us to work through this right now, because what you're going through, we don't want to be dealing with this same issue 6 months or 6 years down the road. And I see this happening all the time. Where some people, they make some moves, they make some choices, and some of it's good, but they find themselves over time that they're right back where they started. I think of it like driving a car. You ever been driving, and I-75 was like this for some time if you're going to Lexington from Richmond, where they're doing the construction, and you hit that point around 95, and you've got to make that decision, okay, am I going to get off here and do the old road, or am I going to try the interstate, which is going to be quicker, and you don't want to get caught in traffic, or maybe you're driving downtown area, and there's a detour, and you're like, but I know this back road, but traffic's backed up because of the time of day it is. Have you ever done that? And it's like, probably the best thing to do is just to keep going, right? But you try to make one of these moves, and I'm convinced in my mind, here's why. If I try to get around what's going on, even if it takes a little longer, and that's usually what happens for me, I'll try to find an alternate route, and then it usually takes me 6, 10, 15 minutes longer than if I'd have just stayed here and kept on the right path, right? But I'm moving. At least I'm moving. And it feels like I'm doing something, but I'm not. And that's what's going on with David. He's got some stuff going on. Oh, yeah, send Uriah home. Oh, yeah, put Uriah on the front line. Oh, yeah, he's got some stuff going on, but it leads him right back to where he started. Sinning. I've sinned. But then David has this thing that maybe some of us don't. And this might be new to some of us, and I hope you see this in the text. This is so stinking important. Something else happens at this point in David's life that is so stinking freeing for people. I hope you get this. So the story goes on. We don't have this on the screen, but the story goes on that Nathan had told David that David's going to live, but the child's going to die. So this child gets sick that Bathsheba bears to David. This child gets sick, and David's a wreck. I mean, he's just a puddle. So he goes and he hangs out with this child, and he won't leave the room. He just stays there, and he lays on the ground. He won't eat. He won't talk to anybody. The only thing he is doing is fasting and praying. He's just wrecked over this child and hoping that the child lives. So this goes on for some time. And the attendants near David, they're like, good gracious. We've got to do something for the fella. Well, a few days elapse, and the child dies. So the attendants are like, what do we do? I mean, look at this guy. And now that the child's dead, I think the text, the NIV says, he's going to do something maybe detestable. What will happen when we tell this guy this child died? If he's acting like this while the child's alive, now that the child's dead, what's he going to do? Well, David, I don't know if he hears words or just a murmur or water because some time has elapsed, but David hears, so he goes over to these guys and he's like, what are you talking about? And they're probably hesitant, right? And David says, is the child dead? And they look at him and they say, yeah, he's dead. And then the text tells us this. David gets up from the ground. He washed, put on lotion, change of clothes, goes to the house of the Lord and worships. Then he goes to his own house, and at his command, he tells people, get me some food, and he eats. Well, the people watching this are like, what? What are you doing? And maybe that's another point where we can step into the story, because if you have people speaking into your life, maybe they're speaking into your life in a way that's going to hold you back a little bit, especially in difficult times. Especially when you're trying to sort through some stuff. So they look at David and they say, why are you acting this way? This makes no sense. The child's alive, you won't eat. The child dies, you eat. What's going on? And I just time out for just a second. I'd like to do a sermon series on this and interpersonal relationships. Think about what's going on here. David is about to step into maybe the healthiest decision he's made in a really long time. And the voices that are loudest in the room right now ask him, why are you acting like this? There is so much there. I think of small children and a parent that's stressed, and the child has an authentic need, but the parent's stressed, and the only thing they can think of is, why are you acting this way? Because there's something really significant going on. You know, there's something going on in a marriage, and someone's trying to move forward. They're trying to sort through some stuff, but the other person's, why are you acting this way? I mean, this is a loaded question, which makes it probably even more powerful, this story, that David's able to bust through that. So David, I mean, this is amazing. And what he does next, so important. Before we get there, room 421. Now, that's where my boy was Sunday, Monday, and half of Tuesday, 421. We're getting some test results, and the doctors are coming by. There's all these vitals being checked, keeping a watch on this and all this stuff. And the doctor comes in, and he starts talking to Christian, and he starts talking to me and Michelle, and he starts saying some stuff that I'm like, wait a minute. You're really serious about this, aren't you? So he's not talking medication, and he's not talking long-term follow-up, and he's not talking any kind of diagnosis. This doctor, who's fully aware of what's going on in Christian's life, starts talking about, I want you to move forward. I don't want you to get hung up on this experience. I think this can be a one-off where all the stars aligned and this happened. But I don't want this to bring you down. And I'm across the bed thinking, I don't know how I feel about that. And then the doctor drops a line like, sometimes you need someone in authority to tell you that it's okay to get past this, that you have permission to move forward. That's what this story of David is doing for every single one of us. Giving you and I permission to move forward and understand what we really need to do based on what we have done. And that we can step out of what we've done. And we can sort through that stuff. And what we will do is so much more important than what's back here. So David looks, and we go on with the story up here on the slides. So David looks at these guys and is like, here's how I'm going to explain it. I mean, when the child was alive, I thought, well, who knows? Maybe God will be gracious and let the child live. Now, another time out for a second. Here's one of my problems with David in this story. Not that I want to pick on the guy. He's been through a lot, so I'm not picking on him. But here's one of my problems with David, and it's a problem I have because I see it in me. And I bet if you're honest, you can kind of see it in you. David has drifted, and denied reality for some time now. And then he says, I thought, who knows? Here's my biggest problem with this story. Several verses earlier, Nathan had told David that the child would die. This is God's voice coming through the prophet Nathan to David. And I see that happening in my life, and I bet that happens in your life. There's some very clear teachings of the leader we should be following, Jesus. And we hear it, and we stiff-arm it. We ignore it, and it causes confusion. And maybe that's why David spent some unnecessary time just laying in a puddle by this bed. David thought, who knows, maybe God. No, God had clearly said otherwise. So the best thing in that difficult moment would have been for David to embrace that. And I know that's where you and I, another point where we can step into the story, and it's difficult. Because there's some clear teachings. If we're going to follow this guy, we're going to follow him. And some of it's clear, but it's hard. Or I'm not there yet. Or I don't want to. Or I ignore it. So it's my only problem with David in this. But I love what he does. He said, I thought, who knows? The child dies, and he says, but now. And notice the power of these words. I mean, this is important. But now, notice this question. It's kind of rhetorical, right? Why should I fast? I was fasting, hoping that God would take notice that I was fasting and let the child live. The child's dead. Why should I do this? It's irrelevant for me to do this. There's no reason for me to do this. And then he goes on and say, can I bring the child back? And then he drops this line, and this is where David stops denying reality, and he starts defining reality. And he lists what he literally can and cannot do. He says, I'll go to him, but I can't bring him back. Defining reality. This is one of the most important things that any business, any organization, any family, any church can do. And often what the business, organization, family, or church is waiting on, someone to define reality and list literally what you can and can't do. I've sat across the table many times with people thinking of a career change and thinking about how invested they want to be in the life of their family and the commitment that this new job opportunity is going to call for them. And they're having to weigh. And I'm like, okay, what's the emotional investment you have with your family? If you're away a lot more than you really want to be, what's the implications of that? How's that going to play out? Can you literally do this? So this is beautiful where David starts to define reality, and he lists what he can and can't do. And maybe that's a wonderful exercise for you this morning. You've got some stuff you're sorting through, and you need to define reality because what you will do is so stinking important. So I'd ask you the question, what can you do? And what can't you do? This is beautiful by David, and it's his first steps forward without any steps backward. Now, if you're not sold on this, I want you to know that Jesus is all over this story. So Jesus is hanging out with some guys, and they come up to him, and he's going to be teaching. And if you've been around church for a while, you know this is one of the biggest passages that we know. We quote it. It's on little emblems and knickknacks and whatnots and all that stuff. You see it in Bibles and highlights and stuff like this. But he tells a group of people, he said, hey, if you hold on to my teachings, then you're really my disciples. You're really my followers. And if you're really my followers and you hold on to my teachings, you're going to know the truth. And it's the truth that will set you free. Can't you see David being very, very, very honest with himself? Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do. Not to sound hokey, but does anybody this morning need to sort through some stuff and be set free? This word truth in the first century world comes from a word that was literally interchangeable with the term reality. Jesus, in essence, says, if you hold to my teachings, you're really my disciples. And you'll know reality. And reality will set you free. This is beautiful. And it's empowering. And it's Jesus saying, yeah, you, and you, and you, and you. I know the stuff you need to sort through. And you have my permission to move forward, to define reality, and start stepping into the future. A guy I meet with about every 4 to 6 weeks, we meet at Purdy's, just a phenomenal guy, and he's sorting through some stuff. Great Christian, just a great presence in his family. Phenomenal father. We meet, and he usually says this once through the time that we're there, and it's just an inspiring moment for us all. Not expiring, inspiring moment for both of us. And he usually drops this line. He dropped it last time we were there 2 weeks ago, and he dropped this line again. He says, I'm just so convinced that for me, for him, right? For me, mindset is everything. Mindset is everything. How you're thinking through this. Let me give you one more verse that I hope you take with you. This comes from Romans 12. Most of your Bibles say something like, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But I love how the NLT puts it. Let God change you into a new person. Let God make you into a new person by the way you think. So the stuff you're sorting out this morning, I hope you're thinking through it the right way. And you're not hung up on what you have done, but you're thinking through what you will do. And you're defining reality so that you're moving forward in the right way. And this story ends with David going back to Bathsheba. And the text tells us that he comforted her. And they have another child, and his name's Solomon. Now, if you know anything about Scripture, you know that Solomon produced some of the Old Testament and was known as the wisest man who had ever lived. In other words, God is on the other side of David stepping forward. And I think maybe some of us walked into this building this morning thinking, who knows? Maybe the sermon will be a 2 or 3. Maybe God will say something to me. Maybe I'll like the songs. I don't know. You're thinking, who knows? But now, right now, you've got something to work with. And it's amazing how we'll leave this building, go through those doors, and go back into your life, and God can be on the other side of that, ready to do something profound. If you'll just do a little work and define reality and think what I can do and what I can't do. What will I do moving forward? If you need help defining your reality and stepping into the future, I'm going to be in the back. I'd love to touch base with you. We can set up a time to talk and work through this. We can get some coffee because coffee makes everything better. And you can take your first steps to defining reality and moving forward. God, thank you for loving us the way that you do, caring for us the way that you do. Thank you for giving us permission to sort through the stuff we need to sort through. Maybe some of it's current, and maybe some of it's from the past, but we've just pushed it to the side and we've hidden it. But right now in this moment, it feels so stinking real. Father, thank you for the permission to know you, to know your son Jesus, to know truth, to know reality, and to be set free. God, you're so good to us, and we just want to say thank you. And thank you for the permission to move forward this morning. In the name of Jesus, we praise you as always.